The very first book I wrote, called The Bluest Eye, was when I was not really thinking about publishing or reviewers or other readers. It was a book I wanted to read, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I began to write it, and it took forever because it had no real reason for being done except my own reading pleasure. It was like a long reading exercise that took 5 years. So when I would read it and I didn't like it a bit, I would change it. I think it's been very helpful for me to look at it as a reader because it gives you distance. Your ego is not all entangled in it, and you're not just thrilled with it because you wrote it. And some writers really prefer to be authors. Those are people who write because that's what they do, or someone has asked them, or they have a contract. I really call myself now a writer because I only write when I can't not do it, when I'm so compelled to do it. And part of it is what I presume will be, since I'm a very good reader and a very fastidious and careful reader, very picky about what I like, I would try to write the kind of book that I really wanted to read.
It's brilliant because, in fact, I mean, it's reading is the whole way in to a writer anyway, isn't it?
Of course.
It's got to be. But why did you then, you had a good job as a publisher's editor.
That's right.
Lecturer? Was a lecturer before or after that?
A little bit during that time, yes.
Same. So lecturer, editor, so you're already immersed in books,
Yes.
other people's books. But you were fairly late starting to write yourself. Now, what made you write, start you off writing?
I think the situation was one in which my back was really up against the wall. I was recently divorced. I had small children. I had a new job. I lived in a small city then. That part of the company was in a place that was strange to me. And I knew that the company was going to move to New York City. So I didn't make any friends because I thought I would leave them soon. In short, I was miserable, absolutely. And even though I had a lot of responsibilities, it's amazing how much time there is when you're unhappy. Some people fill up their misery with parties and dinners and so on. But if you don't do that, the children go to sleep at 7, and then there's the long night before you have to get up the next morning. And that's when I wanted to read this book, because that's what I'd always done in downtime or uptime. I am a reader. And at that time, I was 30, and I really wanted a certain kind of experience I wanted to share. Didn't analyze it terribly much, but I knew that I wanted to read about people like me, people who were black and were young and had lived in the Midwest, and nobody wrote about them. And whenever they did, they were never center stage in a text. They were always toys, background, scenery. And also, the most important thing for me when I was writing is that in this emotional chaos that I was in, the whole world takes on that view. It all looks disorderly. You cannot trust your judgment anymore. The single clear thing was the children. So you're living in a world of chaos. Writing ordered it for me.
Also, I mean, it must have been, when you say you were very unhappy at that time, right, and you had your children, but I used to find that if my husband was away and my children and I were there, it was also very lonely. You didn't go out, and you sort of felt suddenly when they went to bed, that silence in the house, and you were very lonely. And I think writing must be brilliant if you're lonely, because you're suddenly sharing your thoughts and you're putting them down.
That's right. The solitude is critical. People have said that unhappy childhoods make good writers because they tend to read because they're miserable or escape. And the solitude and the loneliness or the aloneness in which you really have only your own company. And if that isn't sufficient, then you will invent other company, and that's what fiction is.
Was your first book, as is proverbially said, all writers write their first book and it's autobiographical? Was yours?
There was a strong taste of my own life in that book. The geography is the geography of the town I grew up in. The relationships are not the same, but I certainly pulled from real people for information, because you're scared, you know, when you write your first book, and you don't trust your imagination, so you go straight to what you know. And then the more I got into it, the more I loved the part that was invention, that was not factual, but true, somehow truer because it wasn't factual.
It's funny though, when you were saying yesterday that it's a danger to write about yourself, though, if you're writing about another character. You gave an illustration of that, didn't you?
Or was I probably talking about sliding in the way an actor or an actress does into a fully visualized or fully realized character? Mm-hmm. At which point, if you begin to use your own emotions and your own self in order to inhabit the character, you're doing them a terrible injustice. Your emotions may not be large enough, or they may be too small, or they're not accurate. They're not authentic necessarily for the character. The character needs your intelligence, not your confused emotions, or even your strong ones. You have to operate from some other place.
But when your publisher looked at it, he actually said this painful bit about a woman who'd been her husband had been disloyal to.
Yeah.
But when you wrote about it,
I wrote about it in what I thought was the most beautiful language to convey the feelings of having been betrayed. I said to him, this is pure, beautiful, distilled pain. And he said, it's demented. And I quarreled with him about that. And finally I said, it is perfect. This is the way it is. He said, yes, Toni, but it's your pain, not hers. And he was absolutely right, which is, you can tell an editor has one sentence that suddenly you know exactly what the error is. And I had written it the way I would have responded to that situation, in my language, my perceptions, and not the characters. And it was awful. So I rewrote the whole thing from her point of view.
An actor's got to do it too. They've got to simulate the feeling, but they of the person, and not put their own feelings into it. That's
exactly.
Right. Yeah. Now, when you came to write Beloved, which I do think is a great book, you did it. You weren't going to write about slavery, you said. Oh. But you ended up. Why not, though, by the way? Did you not want to write about slavery?
Oh, it's too awful. I just didn't think I had the resources, emotional or intellectual or artistic, to dwell in that period for the time it would take to write that book. I just didn't think it was possible for me. And when I ended up in the era, I had been dragged there by the force of the ideas and the characters that I had invented. And I really felt as though I were being kicked into that place, kicking and screaming and saying, why couldn't this life, this problem, this world I want to talk about be in the 1930s or something that I thought I could deal with? I just didn't want to go there. It was too painful. And then I thought, well, if they lived it, then maybe I could spend a few years simply writing it. It was certainly not a life-threatening circumstance. But it was not my choice to do that. I was convinced that I was describing some very contemporary problems.
Well, slavery could be substituted for dire poverty. It could be substituted for somebody feeling crippled by life. I mean, like the irons in their mouth is the way in which some people can't speak about what they feel. I feel that the slavery in your book could be substituted by us, the readers, for whatever we almost want it to be too.
I suppose, in fact, it does function that way. You don't really have to have those experiences. You only have to translate them into one's own individual and, I suppose, human terms, because it's still with us, the residue, not only the historical residue, but the conscription, the problems that such women faced then are still here. We still have to determine how to be complete human beings, how to be responsible to something larger than ourselves, how to be parents, how to be workers, how to be philanthropists, how to take care of and nurture the other, and at the same time, how to be this very unique person.
You began it because of a story you read about a woman called Margaret Garner, who had killed her children because she couldn't bear them to
live the way she had.
The way she'd lived.
She had escaped from slavery. She had made it into a free state with 4 children. And at that time, a slave owner could enter into free territory and take them back. Sort of like the sanctuary movement that's going on in the States now. And the law was controversial. But at any rate, a month or so after she had gotten into free territory, the man did come for her. She saw him and instantly ran out into the back to kill those children. She wounded 2, cut the throat of a 3rd, and was about to bash the head of a 4th into the wall when they caught her and imprisoned her. So that story was haunting, you know, because it was not an exhausted mother. It was not contempt for the children. It was what she said, because she was interviewed a lot. She's in her 20s, and she's very serene. And she said only, they will not live the way I have. And death, she felt, was better.
You often read in papers of say, a case like a father who shot his family and then shoots himself. And people say, but he loved them. He was such a loving father. Why could he do it? Could you get behind that thinking? Well, you did. You got behind it in Beloved. But how difficult was it for you to perceive of being able to say, kill your own children, because you couldn't face life for them?
It's a very, very extraordinary reaction, because what you just described, the fathers always take everybody with them. The mothers commit suicide and leave the children.
Yes.
They don't take their children with them. There's something very interesting about the ways in which males and females respond to that kind of despair. But a woman who takes her children's life, most of the literary precedents for it were Medea, who was really concerned with a man, and she was trying to hurt him by killing her own children, whom she loved. There were tales, I have read them, about them, of women during the war who were in concentration camps, who had to make quick choices, and any choice is the wrong one. And it was that moment. Anything that Margaret Garner would have chosen to do at that moment would have been a disaster. It was a perfect dilemma. I didn't know how to judge her.
Yeah.
So the only one I felt who could judge her would be the daughter she killed. So she, in fact, does return in order to claim what she has been robbed of, which is a mother's love and life, and also to accuse her. She's the only one who can say, how do you know death is better for me, since you've never died? Maybe it isn't. No one else is in a position to ask that question.
No, which is why you brought back Beloved, the daughter, as well. It's a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a ghost?
Well, it's a character that everybody in the book believes is a ghost, but it's a fleshed ghost.
It's brilliantly done, though. It actually nearly made me believe in ghosts, which I don't.
Well, she could also be a person, you see.
Yes.
The evidence is there that she is a traumatized survivor of a slave ship. The language she speaks is the language of someone who indeed may very well have remembered what that was like. And it's the language of death. The questions they ask her when they say, what was it like over there? Could be the other life. It could be a whole of a slave ship. And it was dazzling to me to know that the vocabulary was the same.
When you get the ghost confronts, or the person confronts her, the heroine who had killed the child, in the end, the heroine has to herself forgive herself.
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of the noble motives and the maternal feelings she had and the inescapable reasons for doing it, the whole house is inhabited by their desire for explaining, justifying, and when the ghost spirit moves and she sort of returns in the flesh, the consequences of that encounter are never what Setha, the heroine, the mother, would have expected. All she wanted to do was to love her more. Explain. Let me tell you why I did it. You'll understand, won't you? And of course, the child doesn't
No.
understand at all. All she says is, you left me.
Do you think it is possible then for someone to forgive themselves even when they've done something absolutely terrible? Yeah.
Yes, it's called grace. At some point you do. If you don't, you're in a cul-de-sac. But you have to go through the fire first. You have to experience the full fall and the complete self-loathing in order to come around to something like the forgiving of oneself. It's when you skip responsibility, when you use a substitute emotion like guilt, which is of no use to anyone.
No.
But if you feel the real thing, which is shame, hatred, humiliation, and self-loathing, that is the door. And if you get through that, then you can forgive yourself.
Do you think you ever did that when you were a young girl? Because I think I did. And I didn't know what I was guilty about, and I didn't know what I was loathing about myself. Probably that I was growing up and I didn't like myself in some ways. And any little misdeed I did, I felt was kind of horrifically big.
I think I was unfortunate because that only came to me much later. It would have been healthier for me had I gone through that at an early stage. But for me, it was much later because I was given to believe when I was young that I was smart and bright and cheeky, and practically everything I did turned into something wonderful. So I sort of postponed the confrontation that I had around the time that I'm talking to you about, when there was only me and my own company.
That's when you did it?
That's when I did.
Yeah. Do you think everybody at some point needs that confrontation with
Absolutely.
themselves?
Absolutely. All of the characters in my books, whether they are successful or not, they're all pushed into that place where all the definitions of themselves are suspicious. You say, you are my friend, Insula. Let me see what friendship is. Are you a good person? Are you a good mother? And the circumstances have to be invented so that the characters, which I believe is also true in life, you have to simply be stripped down and made very lean, and so that you can see who you are. And then you make peace. It's difficult, but it's absolutely important. Otherwise, you never arrive at this delicious place called adulthood.
That's right. That's right. I think your book has got the merit of drawing people into it, and then you frighten me, and then you kind of put your arms around me. I had that feeling in your book. Is that a feeling that you wanted
the narrator's presence or voice to take the hand of the reader and say, this is going to be terrible, but don't worry, it's already happened. I have been there, and we can get through it together, and it's going to be fine.
You use a lot of memory from ancestors somehow in the book. Do you not? I mean, do you believe in that? Do you believe that ancestors that you have not known can be still coming through us, working through us, and we retain some memory
I do now.
of them? You do now?
I do now. My whole education, was to make sure I didn't believe things like that, and I dismissed all sorts of things that were indigenous in my family, superstition and, the discredited information, the discredited way of knowing that discredited people always have. But when I began to write, that was the place where I had to go. That's where the information was. That's where the images were. That's where the language, the color came in these tales, folk tales, attitudes, the normal, easy acceptance of signs. And then things began to happen that were really quite startling.
The stump of a tree,
Yes.
which you use where a woman appears, a dead woman appears, is exactly the stump of a tree in fairy stories where a little creature will appear when the children are going through the woods and they become friends or enemies of it. Is that part of a folk memory thing in your case?
Had I thought of the fact that it is very much a part of the fairy tales, I probably wouldn't have put it in the book, but it was a very personal experience that my mother had. She and her sister, as a child, had been playing in the woods, and they saw a woman on a stump, their aunt, and they ran toward her with such enthusiasm, calling her name, and she looked away from them, and she began to moan, and they suddenly got terribly frightened, and they wouldn't go any closer because she was behaving strangely. So they ran home to tell their mother they had seen their aunt, and she was behaving strangely, only to learn when they arrived that that woman was dead and had just died. She's told me that story and millions of others, and my father and my grandparents, all of which they were not alarmed about at all. They had this very sort of comrade relationship with spirits. Well, my studies at college and high school and graduate school, was a different world.
Yeah, driven that out of you.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I found it to be, the world as enchanted began to be the source of so much. And it also began to be artistically, strategically important. The ghost in Beloved is not only because the people believed in ghosts. It's not only because Setha needs the ghost. It's also structurally a way to say memory can come in and sit down next to you at the table. And even though you don't want to remember, and you're trying very hard not to remember, it's always there. It's always with you. And sometimes a situation arises in which you cannot put it off any longer. So it had both structural solutions were solved for me, as well as my ability to use that aspect of the culture which believes that ancestors are the benevolent, guiding spirits that we are and can be constantly in touch with.
Well, I hope you're going to let me be constantly in touch with you by writing another book
Of course.
quite soon. Thanks very, very much indeed for talking to me today, Toni Morrison.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Because I have on one of these Beyonce, lovelier things. I'm delighted to be back in Washington. I have some rather special feelings about this town. It's so different in many ways and so very much alike in other ways. I came here in 1949 in defiance of the only person in my family to ever have gone to college. And when he heard that I was interested in doing this, he suggested I go to Ohio State University because I'm from Ohio. He went there to state school. It wasn't all that far from where I lived. And I just thought that was not such a hot idea. Not because I knew anything really a lot about it, he did, but I really wanted to be in the company of black intellectuals. I thought that would be marvelous. I had been taught by some good teachers, some mediocre, but none black. Never lived in a black neighborhood. And I thought this was the best place to be. They were interested, my family, in sending me away to college. They promised to fund me for 1 year, 3/4. That they thought they could do. After that, it was up to me. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. So I came. I have to say, there were some fabulous teachers here, but as far as being a student, the most exciting place for me, even though I majored in English and minored in humanities, what they called humanities classics. The place that was most exciting for me was in the theater. Not because I was any good. I wasn't. I did one play perfectly. All the rest were embarrassments. But the interesting thing was that we read plays indifferently, not to interpret for a paper, but to understand the whole, the scene, the character, the relationships. It was just a different kind of reading. And for years afterwards, even now, I read plays, buy them and read them, because I don't always like the way they're performed. But if I read them, then I can kind of make it up myself. At any rate, the theater was an important thing for me. And then there was a group of people in Washington. Some were faculty members, some were guest faculty, who had a writing club. There were 6 or 7 or 8 or 9. Owen Dodson and Ann Cook and John Lavelle and 6 or 7, and some people were from Broadway. Some were painters, some were poets, some were historians. Mae Miller, who was a local poet. Anyway, they had this once a month meeting, and I went, and I brought to the meetings old stuff, things you wrote when you were a freshman or when I was teaching here by then, by the way. And they wouldn't let you keep coming if you didn't have anything new. And I had run out of old stories I wrote 10 years ago that weren't any good. I had to write something new. And I was eager to go because they had such good food. I mean, they put on a spread. So I wrote this story about a young girl who had prayed for blue eyes and never got them. At the time I wrote that, it was just a little, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 pages. I was thinking about something that was true in my own life when I was a kid, about a girl that I knew. She and I were close friends, and she had said that. We had quarreled a little bit about whether there was a God. And I, you'll be happy to know, was convinced there was. And she was convinced there wasn't. And she had proof. And the proof was she had prayed for 2 years for blue eyes, and he had not provided them. And I remember looking at her, thinking, suppose she had gotten them, how grotesque it would be. And then realized right after that she was really quite beautiful. I was telling somebody today, at that age you don't really know beauty. Cute or nice but just that. And I didn't realize that she was. First time I ever noticed. Anyway, so I wrote that. And they sort of liked it. I had a good meal. And then I went home. And then I left Howard, got a job as a publisher in an educational publishing house in Syracuse. And I just picked that story up. This was years later. And I was under the impression, this is like, I don't know, what is it, 70s? And everything was black is beautiful and get rid of whitey and stuff that everybody was, snick. And I was going, wait a minute. You are my black queen. I said, hold on. Hold on. You don't remember? Anyway, it was the kind of book that I wished had been written. And nobody had written it. So I thought, I'll take this little story, which didn't work at all because the person in the center was so inarticulate and so unaware that she couldn't hold the story. So I surrounded her with, friends and a family and other people and so on. Now, the important thing is I sent it out to a couple of publishers, and I got letters. I wish I'd kept those letters. I got letters back that said, most of them said, thanks a lot, but no thanks. And once in a while, an editor would take the time to explain why they didn't want it. And I remember one that said, this book has no beginning, no middle, and no end. And I thought, what? But the interesting thing was that I thought all those negative things, there were about 12 of them, I thought they were all wrong. It never occurred to me that their judgment was right. So anyway, eventually I got someone to take it because there was a commercial market for African American men writing, Man Child in the Promised Land and Blood in My Eye and, all that. And it was right in there. No, but not this. So I thought, So they just did it. And then the editor left anyway, so he just sort of floated there in that house. And I thought, well, 500 people will read this. I was pretty right because I think they printed 3,000 copies and sold maybe 1,200. I was very excited about that. And then City University in New York, there was a concurrent women's movement, and they decided that every student who went to CUNY, to City University of New York, had to read certain books by women and by African Americans. And The Bluest Eye was one. Can you believe that if every human being who went to City University of New York had to read The Bluest Eye year after year after year after year? That's a huge sale. So this little book, they had sort of dismissed it. If you ever get a first edition of that, you will not see any biography. It's just this little thing on the flap that I wrote about the story, no bio, because I was working at Random House then, and I didn't think it was a good idea to be writing and publishing. They didn't hire me to be a writer; they hired me to acquire books. And it was all stupid. And the big picture of me on the back. Anyway, the paperback house didn't have any more books. They had sold out their little 4,500 or whatever. So all of a sudden, this order comes in from City, and they have to repeat because it's required reading. So therein lies the success. But the point of the story is this: after that book was accepted, I went into this very, very deep sadness. I had 2 children. They were the light of my life. But there really was nothing else. I went to work. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that there was this call of darkness. And I realized that I didn't have anything to think, that I missed writing. It taken me 5 years to write The Bluest Eye, that little book, because I was so much enjoying it, enjoying the writing of it, that I wasn't rushing toward a deadline. And then I realized that one of the things that was bothering me was I didn't have another writing idea. And then I thought of Sula that thing. And everything in the world began to look coherent to me again. I mean, even that which was incoherent or bad was useful. It's all territory. It's all information. It's all, you can use or not use all of it. So the point being, I am very happy when I'm writing, or even if I'm not writing, if I have an idea about something I want to write, and it sort of pulls me together intellectually, spiritually, just in every way. Language does that for me. Anyway, so I've always recognized since then what that posthumous, postpartum depression was after, writing a book. So I don't worry about it anymore, although recently I have. At any rate, I don't know if I've been going on too long. I organized this thing to do 10 minutes of this, 20 minutes of that, and then the rest in Q&A. So I don't know. Did I go over? No one knows. No one cares. It's okay. Well, the thing is, having an idea, just a question. I don't know about this. Is this really true? Or I see something written in a little piece of paper that seems to me to hit something very current, like when I wrote Paradise. It was because I was reading about black newspapers in Oklahoma and the advertisements that they were putting in those. There were like 50 black newspapers, and there were all these colored towns. And one of the ads said, "Come prepared or not at all. Don't come if you don't have any money. Don't come if you need." So I thought, oh, that's mean. What about all these slaves? They were ex-slaves, right, going west. And they'll tell me they would get to a little town and nobody would take them in. So that idea of constructing black towns was fascinating to me in Paradise. And other ideas that just questions, what was that like? What must that have felt like? When I did A Mercy, I was really interested, as I was explaining to some students about when did racism become so much the law of the land and associated with slavery, as though black slaves were this brand new idea. Slavery was everywhere. I mean, all the empires rested on slavery. Greece, Rome, Turkey, England, Russia, Europe in general. That's who did that work. They called them something else, and peons, but they worked the land, and it went on for generations. So it wasn't like that was some brand new idea that just it was invented in America. But what happened to make it associated with chattel slavery and race? Because they had indentured servants whose children were also indentured, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I had to go back to a time before racism was established and institutionalized. Because nobody's born like that. So what is it? When did it really get legalized, institutionalized? And that was interesting to me. So I had to go back to 17th century, 1690, because in 1692 were the Salem witch trials. So the friction was about religion, not race. It was powerfully, this religion, mine is good, yours is not. You get to hang, whatever. So that put me back there. And then the problem became, who's going to tell this story? So when I figured that out, I was very happy with my what I thought was my little smart idea, but I had no voice for this girl. I didn't know what she sounded like, because she was born a slave, Portuguese plantation. She's taught to read and write by a Catholic priest, and she comes up north. So anyway, instead of trying to do what they call a language of the period, or some dialect that I couldn't even invent, I found her voice by simply making sure she only spoke in the present tense. She doesn't use the past tense. On the one hand, it made her young, in my view. That is, young people, it's always now. There's no past, there's no future. It's like now. So she talks that way. And so in developing it, and then I began to like that voice. I began to really like it, as opposed to the other sort of traditional voices. So I'm going to read from the opening and the end. I'll tell you why I'm going to read the beginning and the end. It doesn't matter if you haven't read it, because reading the end doesn't tell you anything. Okay, I think you should get the address. Who's she talking to? Don't be afraid. She's talking to a reader? No. But anyway, I hope it becomes clear who she has to persuade, and at the same time sort of situate the story. Don't be afraid. My telling can't hurt you, in spite of what I have done. And I promise to lie quietly in the dark, weeping perhaps, or occasionally seeing the blood once more. But I will never again unfold my limbs to rise up and bare teeth. I explain. You can think what I tell you a confession if you like, but one full of curiosities, familiar only in dreams, and during those moments when a dog's profile plays in the steam of a kettle, or when a corn husk doll sitting on a shelf is soon splaying in the corner of a room, and the wicked of how it got there is plain. Stranger things happen all the time, everywhere. You know. I know you know. One question is, who is responsible? Another is, can you read? If a peahen refuses to brood, I read it quickly. And sure enough, that night, I see Amenemai standing hand in hand with her little boy, my shoes jamming the pocket of her apron. Other signs need more time to understand. Often there are too many signs, or a bright omen clouds up too fast. I sort them and try to recall, yet I know I am missing much, like not reading the garden snake crawling up to the door saddle to die. Let me start with what I know for certain. The beginning begins with the shoes. When a child, I'm never able to abide being barefoot, and always long for shoes, always beg for shoes, anybody's shoes, even on the hottest days. My mother, Amenemai, is frowning, is angry, at what she says are my pretty fly ways. Only bad women wear high heels. I am dangerous, she says, and wild, but she relents and lets me wear the throwaway shoes from Senora's house, pointy toe, one raised heel broke, the other worn, and a buckle on top. As a result, Lena says, my feet are useless, will always be too tender for life, and never have the strong soles, tougher than leather, that life requires. Lena is correct. Florence, she says, it's 1690. Who else these days has the hands of a slave and the feet of a Portuguese lady? So when I set out to find you, she and mistress give me sir's boots that fit a man, not a girl. They stuff them with hay and oily corn husks and tell me to hide the letter inside my stocking, no matter the itch of the sealing wax. I am lettered, but I do not read what mistress writes, and Lena in sorrow cannot. But I know what it means to say to any who stop me. My head is light with the confusion of two things, hunger for you and scare if I am lost. Nothing frights me more than this errand, and nothing is more temptation. From the day you disappear, I dream and plot to learn where you are and how to be there. I want to run across the trail through the beach in White Pine, but I'm asking myself, which way? Who will tell me? Who lives in the wilderness between this farm and you? And will they help me or harm me? What about the boneless bears in the valley? Remember how when they move their pelts, sway as though there's nothing underneath? Their smell belying their beauty, their eyes knowing us from when we are beasts also. You telling me that is why it is fatal to look them in the eye. They will approach, run to us, to love and play, which we misread and give back fear and anger. Giant birds are also nesting out there, bigger than cows, Lena says. And not all natives are like her, she says. So watch out. A praying savage, neighbors call her, because she is once church-going. Yet she bathes herself every day, and Christians never do. Underneath, she wears bright blue beads and dances in secret at first light when the moon is small. More than fear of loving bears or birds bigger than cows, I fear pathless night. How, I wonder, can I find you in the dark? Now, at last, there is a way. I have orders. It is arranged. I will see your mouth and trail my fingers down. You will rest your chin in my hair again while I breathe into your shoulder, in and out, in and out. I'm happy the world is breaking open for us, yet its newness trembles me. To get to you, I must leave the only home, the only people I know. Lena says from the state of my teeth, I am maybe 7 or 8 when I am brought here. We boil wild plums for jam and cake 8 times since then. So I must be 16. Before this place, I spend my days picking okra and sweeping tobacco sheds. My nights on the floor of the cookhouse, with Amenamai. We are baptized and can have happiness when this life is done. Reverend Father tells us that. Once every 7 days, we learn to read and write. We are forbidden to leave the place, so the 4 of us hide near the marsh. My mother, me, her little boy, and Reverend Father. He is forbidden to do this, but he teaches us anyway, watching out for wicked Virginians and Protestants who want to catch him. If they do, he will be in prison or pay money or both. He has 2 books and a slate. We have sticks to draw through sand, pebbles to shape words on smooth, flat rock. When the letters are memory, we make whole words. I am faster than my mother, and her baby boy is no good at all. Very quickly, I can write from memory the Nicene Creed, including all of the commas. Confession we tell, not write, as I am doing now. I forget almost all of it until now. I like talk, Lena talk, Stone talk, even sorrow talk. Best of all is your talk. At first, when I am brought here, I don't talk any word. All of what I hear is different from what words mean to Amenamai and me. Lena's words say nothing, I know, nor mistress's. Slowly, a little talk is in my mouth and not on stone. Lena says the place of my talking on stone is Mary's land, where Sir does business. So that is where my mother and her baby boy are buried, or will be if they ever decide to rest. Sleeping on the cookhouse floor with them is not as nice as sleeping in the broken sleigh with Lena. In cold weather, we put planks around our part of the cowshed and wrap our arms together under pelts. We don't smell the cow flops because they are frozen and we are deep under fur. In summer, if our hammocks are hit by mosquitoes, Lena makes a cool place to sleep out of branches. You never like a hammock and prefer the ground, even in rain, when Sir offers you the storehouse. Sorrow no more sleeps near the fireplace. The men helping you, Will and Scully, never lived the night here because their master does not allow it. You remember them, how they would not take orders from you until Sir makes them. He could do that since they are exchange for land under lease from Sir. Lena says Sir has a clever way of getting without giving. I know it is true because I see it forever and ever. Me watching, my mother listening, her baby boy on her hip. Senor is not paying the whole amount he owes to Sir. Sir is saying he will take instead the woman and the girl, not the baby boy, and the debt is gone. Amenamai begs, no, her baby boy is still at her breast. Take the girl, she says. My daughter, she says. Me. Sir agrees and changes the balance due. As soon as tobacco leaf is hanging to dry, Reverend Father takes me on a ferry, then a ketch, then a boat, and bundles me between his boxes of books and food. The second day it becomes hurting cold, and I am happy I have a cloak, however thin. Reverend Father excuses himself to go elsewhere on the boat and tells me to stay exact where I am. A woman comes to me and says, stand up. I do, and she takes my cloak from my shoulders, then my wooden shoes. She walks away. Reverend Father turns a pale red color when he returns and learns what happens. He rushes all about, asking where and who, but can find no answer. Finally, he takes rags, strips of sailcloth lying about, and wraps my feet. Now I am knowing that unlike with Senor, priests are unloved here. A sailor spits into the sea when Reverend Father asks him for help. Reverend Father is the only kind man I ever see. When I arrive here, I believe it is the place he warns against, the freezing in hell that comes before the everlasting fire, where sinners bubble and singe forever. But the ice comes first, he says. And when I see knives of it hanging from the house and trees and feel the white air burn my face, I am certain the fire is coming. Then Lena smiled when she looks at me and wraps me for warmth. Mistress looks away, nor is Sorrow happy to see me. She flaps her hand in front of her face as though bees are bothering her. She is ever strange, and Lena says she is once more with child. Father still not clear, and Sorrow does not say. Will and Scully laugh and deny. Lena believes it is Sirs, says she has her reason for thinking so. When I ask her what reason, she says, he's a man. Mistress says nothing, neither do I. But I have a worry, not because our work is more, but because mothers nursing greedy babies scare me. I know how their eyes go when they choose, how they raise them to look at me hard, saying something I cannot hear, saying something important to me, but holding the little boy's hand. Well, I was going to read the end, but I don't think I will. I'll read, I want to leave enough time for questions. And this thing's supposed to be over at 9, right? Is that right? Okay. Anyway, if you have time, I'll do it. But what I do want to do, as promised, because I'm interested in it, is read just a few pages of a book, the next novel that I'm writing. You'll be happy to know, I hope, that I finished it. And I have a title. And so I'm going to read you these few pages of the voice of the man who is, about whom the story is written. I'll tell you a little bit about the strategy because it might be of some interest. I wanted this voice to talk to me. I'm writing the story, me, author, and he's sort of correcting me, disagreeing, or just describing something, so that there's a kind of conversation that goes on. Not overwhelming, but every now and then he comes in between the so-called author and the subject. So this is his voice that opens the book, okay? They rose up like men. We saw them. Like men they stood. We shouldn't have been anywhere near that place. Like most farmland outside Lotus, Georgia, this here one had plenty scary warning signs. The threats hung from wire mesh fences with wooden stakes every 50 or so feet. But when we saw a crawl space that some animal had dug, a coyote maybe or a coon dog, we couldn't resist. Just kids we were. The grass was shoulder high for her and waist high for me. So looking out for snakes, we crawled through it on our bellies. The reward was worth the harm grass juice and clouds of gnats did to our eyes, because there, right in front of us, about 50 yards off, they stood like men, their raised hooves crashing and striking, their manes tossing back from wild white eyes. They bit each other like dogs. But when they stood, reared up on their hind legs, their forelegs around the withers of the other, we held our breaths in wonder. One was rust-colored, the other deep black, both sunny with sweat. The neighs were not as frightening as the silence following a kick of hind legs into the lifted lips of the opponent. Nearby, colts and mares, indifferent, nibbled grass or looked away. Then it stopped. The rust-colored one dropped its head and pawed the ground, while the winner loped off in an arc, nudging the mares before him. As we elbowed back through the grass, looking for the dugout place, avoiding the line of parked trucks beyond, we lost our way. Although it took forever to recite the fence, neither of us panicked until we heard voices, urgent but low. I grabbed her arm and put a finger to my lips, never lifting our heads, just peeping through the grass. We saw them pull a body from a wheelbarrow and throw it into a hole already waiting. One foot stuck up over the edge and quivered as though it could get out, as though with a little effort it could break through the dirt being shoveled in. We could not see the faces of the men doing the burying, only their trousers. But we saw the edge of a spade driving the jerking foot down to join the rest of itself. When she saw that black foot with its creamy pink and mud-streaked sole being whacked into the grave, her whole body began to shake. I hugged her shoulders tight and tried to pull her trembling into my own bones because, as a brother, 4 years older, I thought I could handle it. The men were long gone, and the moon was a cantaloupe by the time we felt safe enough to disturb even one blade of grass and move on our stomachs, searching for the scooped out part under the fence. When we got home, we expected to be whipped or at least scolded for staying out so late. But the grown-ups didn't notice us. Some disturbance had their attention. And since you're set on telling this story, and since you're set on telling my story, whatever you think and whatever you write down, know this: I really forgot about the burial. I only remembered the horses. They were so beautiful, so brutal, and they stood like men.
If you're interested in asking Professor Morrison a question, please make your way to the center aisle where Mr. Golden will assist you. Please state your name, where you're from, and keep your comment or question brief. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Becca Daniels. I'm a student here at GW, and I was wondering what your reaction was to the New York Times headline after the 2008 presidential election, which stated Obama elected president as racial barrier falls. And do you believe the American perspective has changed on race over the past 3 years, or perhaps will change?
Well, some of it has changed. That's a hard. Listen, racism pays. It's useful. It works. You don't find anybody writing an editorial column or on television that has something nice to say about the president. It doesn't pay. Nobody wants to hear it. Also, racism is expensive, very expensive. You have to have 2 toilets instead of 1. But it has always worked because you don't have to talk about class. You only talk about race in this country. So it's going to be very hard to just get rid of that because it almost has nothing to do with people's real feelings. You know, remember, I don't know if you wouldn't remember, you're too young, but I remember during the Civil Rights Movement, the problem, they didn't mind if the white people of the South, so-called South, they didn't care if they stood next to a black person. They just didn't want to sit next to the black person. You know, it was a sort of a horizontal thing. I mean, you look at it sort of logically, it's one of those strange things that exist in this country and in some other countries. But if it didn't work, they'd give it up that it works. And as far as the politics is concerned, I have some strong feelings about the current nature of the political scene. And then as soon as I think I grabbed it, something else happens and I don't understand it anymore. So I can't answer the question completely, but I can tell you that it never occurred to me that race disappeared, or racism, not race, disappeared just because they elected Barack Obama to the White House.
Okay, sorry. Hello, Professor Morrison. Thanks for coming. My name is Ramzi. I'm a senior here at GW, and my question is, in one of my classes, we saw an interview you gave to C-SPAN where you said that you didn't think Beloved or The Bluest Eye was age appropriate for a lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers who read it in required reading programs. And my question is, given the movies, TV shows, and music my generation listens to, do you really still think that's true? And on the topic of required readings, do you think there's any books that should be added or taken off the current list that are in our public schools?
Well, you know, you're right about, when I said that, I was not thinking about all of the blatant sexuality and murder and blood and guts that are routine on television. And there's a little, I guess, restraining order, like this is not fit for everyone or something. But at the time, you know, The Bluest Eye was banned everywhere in schools. And I even got a letter, which I put on my bathroom wall, from the Texas Correctional Institution, which had banned Song of Solomon from the prison library. And they had little blocks about why they banned different books, and mine was because it might start a prison riot. So I felt I had accomplished something. I had written a book that might just inflame a whole prison. But what I was sort of my sister did not permit her children to read The Bluest Eye until they were 17 years old. My sister. So I just couldn't start saying, oh, everyone should. My feeling is that people should read anything and everything. And you can't be frightened of dirty words. I mean, what kind of brain is that? You're scared because somebody said, I mean, it's unbelievable. But there's so many brilliant books that are on the no-read list, Ulysses, Goodbye Columbus, everything worth reading is banned by somebody in the schools. So that's why I may have been a little flip when I had that answer on CNN. But my feeling is that, I don't feel these things compete with one another. Who wants a book that is not alive? It's designed, there is a certain kind of level of children's books, and I'm not sure at what level anybody should read anything. I remember being in the 6th grade, and since I could read for a long, long time, before I went to school, and I remember being in the 6th grade, the teacher had told us to bring a book from home to read. I bought in this book called A Strange Woman. And it was interesting, except I didn't know what they were talking about. And it was made into a movie later with Hedy Lamarr. And the book was about a woman who liked, what do you call it when they like to be beaten? Masochism. Yeah, her. So every now and then, something, and she would go in the garage and her husband would hit her. I don't know. And I was going, and the teacher said to me, I don't think you should be reading that book. And so she took it away and she gave me Tom Sawyer. Which I had read like 3 years before. So I was sitting there going, so I guess she was trying to protect me, I don't know. But the funny thing was that I didn't understand the book anyway. The real subtlety of masochistic, sexual, whatever. I don't know. My mother joined the Literary Guild. We had all kinds of books in the house. Some of them were good and some of them were horrible. So I don't think you should curtail the inquisitive mind of a child.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you. We have time for 2 more questions, really, because the evening's running late. We could be here till 11 o'clock tonight, but we did promise Ms. Morrison that we would end this program by about 9, so we're running over time. 9-ish. So thank you for standing in line for the questions, but we'll take these 2. We'll begin here, please.
My name's Christina Mueller, and I'm a former GW English student. Professor Morrison, welcome back to DC.
Thank you.
I live in a small community, a small rapidly gentrifying community called LaDroit Park beneath Howard University. And my question for you is, in a community that is changing so quickly, what is your advice to this city and to my community about how to graciously move through this transition with its implicit and explicit racism through gentrification?
I don't really know. Somebody asked me that in Vienna about Harlem. And she said, I understand all the Mom and pop stores are gone. All the numbers runners are gone. It's terrible. It's awful. Because Walmart's up there, somebody, you know, and rich or upper middle class white people are buying all the big houses and so on, lawyers and so on. And I told her, I mean, I was being flip, and I said, oh, just get over it. Things change. The place used to be Dutch, you know, before. before, you know, it became all black. I come from such a mixed city, town, with so many immigrants from Poland and Italy and Czechoslovakia and black people and Mexican people. And I could read and speak English fairly well, so I was all, and my last name at that time was toward the end of the alphabet. So I always sat next to Nunzio Zano and all these, you know, Zawicki's and people who didn't speak English. And I, you know, kids learn English real fast, so they always put me next to those, you know, immigrant kids. So anyway, I didn't feel that until I came to Washington. Did I feel the power of segregation, cultural segregation, until I came to this city, you know. And I thought the whole world was like Lorain, Ohio. You know, oh, you know, even when I went to New York, I thought that. No, it's not. But, you know, I think you have to not make it an either-or choice. You have to do what's comfortable and ethical and generous in your life. And neighborly, exactly.
Thank you. Well, we have time for one more. These questions are sensational. Wish we could go on all night, but your name and where you're from.
I'm Akbar Montasser. I'm chemistry professor. I've been here 30 years and 36 years as a professor, but in your presence, I'm a student. I have a question. I think I have read half of your books, and in these books, and also in the other black scholars, you rarely find to discuss a problem in this country. In 1981, the number of prisoners were about 100,000, if we trust Google. And approximately we have 2 million prisoners right now. We have 5% of world population, but we have 25% of world prisoner. So it's really strange that we talk about human rights, but we neglect it all the way at home. And regrettably, the scholars at home completely forget about it. So when you read Beloved, I think it would be very lovely to see the story of these prisoners and what happens.
Well, you're right about the subject matter and the outrageous absence of human rights, and also the preponderance of nonviolent crime people in it who had a little marijuana or something, and the courage and the private prison industry, which is growing, needs prisoners. I mean, you know, it needs them the way it needs food. So the more people they can criminalize, you know, whether they're illegal immigrants or some young black men or some children, the merrier, because they get money. That's a way in which, as I was saying before, race works, because you get to put all those people in there and so on. And also they work. They got prisons in Texas where when you leave the prison, you owe money for room and board. Because they're private prisons, you know, they're not. Anyway, so you're right about that. And I don't know how to, it's not an interesting story, fictionally speaking, to me. It's an interesting idea. It's a sociologically powerful thing to examine. You know, I'm a very close friend of Angela Davis, and that's all she does is work on prison stuff and have organizers and books and so on. But I've never found it compelling fictional material. I might do at some point, but so far not.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Morrison. Please join me in thanking Professor Morrison one last time.
Will do.
One more.
She said she'll take the one last question.
Ms. Morrison, the next president of the United States.
Thank you. Hello, Ms. Morrison.
Hello.
I'm Tashiana. I'm a student from Howard University. On behalf of the class of 2014, I'd like to say we are anxiously awaiting your return to the university. I just wanted to ask you, what's your writing process like, and which of your novels did you most enjoy writing, and what do you feel makes a good novel?
The process varies. I don't write if it's not there. I mean, I don't write every day just because I have the time. If I don't have the scene or the dialogue or the picture or something, if it's not clear, I don't write. And the more I write, the more economical I can be. I know when the writing, I didn't always know when I was writing badly in the beginning. I would write and write and write, and it was like horrible, and then I have to throw it away and then do something else. But now I know how to skip the bad writing and just go straight to what I really want to say. So that process is very, it's routine. I write very, very early in the morning before, anybody's up. I start so I can be finished by noon. And so that's the process. And you didn't ask me about a favorite book. You said, how do I?
Which novel did you most enjoy writing?
Oh, well, always the one I'm doing now. I mean, the one I just read from. Perfection.
People down here are asking what the name of the novel is.
Home.
Home.
That's a hard one to remember.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
And
question.
thank you.
It takes a great university, I say this based on experience, to understand that the literary imagination has to do with the lives that we lead. Not necessarily or only in an abstract sense, but really the ethical lives that we lead, the public lives that we lead, as well as the private lives we lead. And that kind of devotion to the humanities and to literature in particular has always been for me very distinctive about Cornell. And I think everybody who introduced us only made that clear. So I want to thank you all very much. And this is really, the fact that we're here in a strange way, this event was so generously organized so that we could continue a conversation that began many, many years ago, literally based on language. That is, when I had first arrived at Princeton and Toni had first arrived at Princeton, I attended a public lecture she gave, and there was just this one metaphor in the talk. And when we met at dinner afterwards, I asked her about that metaphor, and Toni just sort of looked at me and said, "Oh, you got that one." And that was that. And it is not an exaggeration to say that with interruptions, we really haven't stopped talking since. So it was really on the basis of the language that she was using and my immediate attention to it, because it was so arresting in a way, that we ever got to know each other. This is the conversation being continued, so to speak, but thanks to Cornell. And as has already been said, you studied here at Cornell, Toni, and so would you want to amplify anything that was said about what you were studying and maybe some of the professors whom you had at the time?
Yes, fading memory. So I'm trying to recollect some of the more important things. The first thing, of course, was the faculty. I remember at least 3 of them. very well. Robert Elias, Mr. Meisner, and I think the other one's name was Sayles, S-A-Y-L-E-S. At any rate, they were extraordinary. Also, I was under the impression that, well, I'll tell you the truth. This is 1953 or 4, and there was this fear, overwhelming fear, of communism. And so when I left Howard University and thinking about graduate school, I had heard that there were some interesting religions, a chapel with 3 religions here. And it had a reputation, I don't know if this is good news or bad, of being what we used to call pink, which is a way of saying liberal. And I thought, this might be a good idea. I am born in Lorain, Ohio, very close to Oberlin, which has this history of being the first college to admit women and African Americans. So pink for me was kind of an echo of the kind of region, an intellectual region that I had been brought up in. So those were 2 reasons. And the third is maybe a little trivial, but it was important to me, was its beauty. I don't know if you fully appreciate that, but being in this part of the country with distinct seasons was overwhelming. It was true in Ohio. I was in Washington, D.C. You know, it's like living in California. I keep waiting for something to happen. And that was part of it. That was part of it. And the last thing, I'm remembering, Claudia, was the ag school.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that still here? I mean, a big agricultural. They had the Cornell bread, you may not remember. You could break an egg open. For 25 cents, you could buy an egg and a piece of toast. And more often than not, when they opened it, there were 2 yolks. So I remembered all the fresh and experimental food from the ag campus.
I heard a lot about that food. And
So those were reasons, you know, some more serious than others, but those are my recollections.
the hotel management school that we're in.
Oh yeah,
And
remember
it was-
Statler, oh yeah.
We're going to be talking about physical beauty a little bit later, but I'm going to ask you now sort of an academic question, which is that you wrote here for your master's on Woolf and Faulkner.
Yes.
Is there anything that you just want to talk about in that?
Well, I skirted around as most, I think, graduate students do with this topic versus that one, and Robert Elias didn't like any of them, so I thought, okay, what do we do? Well, we had read some English literature, you know, Virginia Woolf, and I just wrote this thing on suicide in both because they were so wildly different from one another. And so it was all right. It was all right. Interesting topic, anyway.
Recently, you gave the Ingersoll Lecture at the Harvard Divinity School. This is on now, I think yeah, okay. And the theme of the lecture series that year that you also addressed was simply the word goodness. But the title of your lecture in specific was Goodness, Altruism, and the Literary Imagination. And when you announced this to me, it first suggested, at least to me, that title would entail just the opposite argument from the one that indeed you in fact made. Rather than indicating the many ways and the works in which the literary imagination has given voice to altruism, to selfless acts undertaken for others, you instead described goodness in literature as personified very often as, and this was your word, mute. You argued that while what you called the quote-unquote theatricality of evil makes for compelling viewing, quote, goodness in contemporary literature, and the quote continues, seems to be equated with weakness. Evil, you said, has a blockbuster audience. Goodness lurks backstage, close quote. And then, leaving aside even these visual metaphors, you offered the following startling, indeed literally accurate, that's what really gave me pause, literally accurate observations about some of the most celebrated embodiments of goodness in modern English language fiction. And now I'm just going to, with your permission, I'm going to quote you from that lecture. Quote, evil has vivid speech, goodness bites its tongue. It is Billy Budd who can only stutter. It is Cutsy's Michael K. with a hair lip that so limits his speech that communication with him is virtually impossible. It is Melville's Bartleby, confining language to repetition. It is Faulkner's Benji, an idiot. And then you went on to say, contemporary literature is not interested in goodness on a large or even limited scale. When it appears, it is with a note of apology in its hand and has trouble speaking its name.
True.
Well, we need more than that, I'm guessing. So I wanted to ask if you wanted, I was extremely struck by these observations, talk to you about them and talk to you about them. So, and I have a little bit more to say about that, but I want to hear if you want to comment on these observations yourself right
Well, I've
now.
said before, I hadn't explored it as carefully as I did for the Ingersoll, but I was always a little bored by demonstrations of evil. They relied on the same things. I used to say it always has this top hat and a cape and a tuxedo and a cane, and it has all this stuff, glamour and costume, maybe even a little theme music. But the goodness never has anything, because it doesn't want anything. Can't use anything. It's just there. And in the literature, the early literature, 18th, I guess, and certainly 19th century, the Dickens kind of moved, horrible, horrible life, but there was this yearning, this stretch toward a resolution. And the good people survived and the bad people either didn't or changed, and that was true of many of them. Jane Austen, of course, that kind of thing was about getting married, and being married was good if you got the right person. And that was true of most of that literature. I think what happened is World War I, when goodness, and certainly after World War II, when being a good person was trivial, almost silly. A character could only be understood to be good if he was stupid, he was never clever or sophisticated or even well educated. They were always vaguely stupid. Hemingway has a lot of those little good, stupid people, and except for himself, of course. He's always good. And more and more and more. So and I haven't done the really important work, which is to look at the very recent literature, to see if there is anything different about that. My sense is that there is not a difference. The few books that, the good few books that I get and read sometimes have extraordinary, brilliant, beautiful language, but the thrust and the effort in the language is toward trying to explain something that is corrupt. or lacking. If not reaching the heights of evil, it lurks around evil. And that's what's supposed to interest the reader. It's not interesting to me. It's too easy, if you get my drift. Goodness is really and truly hard. You can't seduce it. So writing and trying to find language for it has been probably all I have ever done in the novel.
Yes, and that was what I was thinking when you were giving this lecture.
Yeah.
That, my goodness, but what about all your own work? And in a sense, in the lecture, at a certain point, you turn to it, and I think everyone in this room, whom I assume has probably read everything that you've written, every narrative you've written, we all have our preferred moments from your works in which what we could call goodness speaks, not asking for anything and without a trace of sanctimony or self-righteousness, but rather exactly with this kind of humility, but the real humility that comes with real virtue if you put it in practice. And speaking of your most recent novel, Home, at a certain point in that lecture, you did talk about your own work, and you stated of the character, Miss Ethel, whom you probably all remember if you've read Home, who with her fellow women not only heals the protagonist's sister, C, physically, but challenges her with the following words, quote, "Inside you is that free person. Locate her and let her do some good in the world," unquote. And you also mentioned your first fiction, The Bluest Eye, and the misguided wish of a character to give, quote, "the gift of blue eyes to a little girl in psychotic need of them," close quote. And you went on to state, in his letter to God, the character, Soped Church, imagines himself doing the good that God refuses. Misunderstood as it is, his wish, has language. This is all quotation from that lecture, which I hope we're all going to see published. It has language. I myself can think of nothing more important one can give to goodness, and no greater challenge to the literary imagination than to make that language work as language rather than as a beautiful picture or poor cousin of the ineffable, the transcendent, and thus the necessarily mute. What I'm really interested in asking, which I hadn't really, and I really have to thank everyone for organizing this event because I hadn't thought of it this way, even having heard that lecture as it was delivered, until I had to think about what I wanted to speak about this evening. Would you care to comment on how you try in your novels to use narrative to give goodness language?
Yes. I thought I coined a phrase, which I didn't apparently, called invisible ink. And it was writing a novel in such a way that the reader gets taken in. It works with the novel, that the reader and I create it together. And I do that by using this thing or this technique, which you can forget since I say it, called invisible ink, where the meaning is in the structure. All the ending is always what I have to know before I start, because that's where it's going. That's where the meaning lies. I don't always know the middle. I have to know how to get there. But I know that it's in the way it is put together, what I withhold from the reader and what I dwell on at the same time. In that way, I can employ whatever language is at my disposal in order to summon in the reader these responses. this pride in something that really is moral. It's not cheap. It's not easy. It's hard won. It's very hard won. But it's like Miss Ethel says, you're a girl and you're black and you're young or whatever, and that may be problematic for you. However, you are a person, and deep down is this free person. That's the one you should be paying attention to. That's the one you need to use to do some good in the world. And that kind of, I don't know, simple clarity about what is valuable without painting it with some, colors that are just sentiment. These are hard-won lessons spoken by people who have been there and are not crushed. I think one of the lines, which I used to hear a lot when I was little, is they were taking care of a woman in home, a woman who was down on her luck and very sick and couldn't help herself, but it was a neighbor who hated them and always thought she was above them and lorded it over them. But they take care of her when she's in trouble. And they say the reason, or the author says the reason is that he, at the end of their lives, might say or ask, "What have you done?" And they didn't want to, they had to answer that. They couldn't come up short and say, "Ooh, I watch TV." But something serious. They did not want to be halting in their answer.
Well, yeah, I'd say the narrative is your doing in that event. It's
Yeah.
Well, you're doing something for your reader, and that's very different from people simply making speeches. It takes a long time for C to get to the place where Miss Ethel can actually say that to her. First of all, she's almost dead.
No.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for the crushed character who is very busy looking for love or kindness or support or am I okay? Is it true? It's so desperate and gets in a lot of trouble. So when she gets close to death and is literally saved, when that happens, and by the way, while she's ill, the women say, "Shut up. Stop crying. Shut your mouth. Don't puke. If you do, you have to drink it again. Open up your legs." They have no sympathy, just art, skill, and confidence. But they don't want to hear whining. They don't want to hear any of this. They're very tough. But they're also the people you can rely on completely and who will tell you those things that Miss Ethel said to see.
Last spring, your work, Desdemona, was presented at Lincoln Center. The work is hard to categorize because it is not a play in any traditional sense, nor a spectacle unless one thinks, as Walter Benjamin wrote, of Baroque tragedy, that what is being perceived are not events or a story, but words spoken by a consciousness in the course of thought, a spectacle, one could say, of reflection. Very hard to do. Would you please describe what Desdemona is and how it came about?
Yeah, that was something I was extremely, ultimately proud of and extremely excited about doing it with Peter Sellers, who wanted to do something. Well, it goes back a little bit because he was doing a course, an atelier at Princeton. He was there for a month doing some drama with the students. And he said to me, while we were sitting outside on a bench, I think, eating lunch or something, he said he would never, ever do Othello. And I said, why not? And he said, it's just too thin. There's nothing there. And I said, you're talking about the productions, which are kind of thin and predictable.
You know, big black guy, little white girl, da, 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 da. He kills her, you know, whatever. I said, but that's not true. That's not it. First of all, he's a Moor, which means he's probably an Arab. Second of all, she is not this little kitty girl that he steals. She runs away from home during the time when you either went to the convent or you were married, and she could have been jailed for eloping with him. That's a very daring thing to do. Secondly, she went to war with him. You know, when they went out, she's sitting out on the edges of the battle while they're fighting. And then she gets all involved in his business. I'm telling him who to hire and who to fire. So she was not this little creepy girl. Oh, I shouldn't say creepy. Innocent little girl. And I thought that when he was trying to kill her, she probably fought like the devil. You know, she was, oh, he's strangling me. Don't. You know, I thought maybe one of those. Anyway, I went on and on. So he did an Othello, a very interesting one, you know, at Public Theater. And then by that time, I had agreed to do what he asked me to do, which was a play about Desdemona, this woman that I thought was much more interesting than I had ever seen her performed on stage. And I said, why does she like this guy anyway? Othello. All she did was turn down people. You know, her father kept bringing guys. She would say no, and he was getting a little nervous. And Othello comes, the captain of the army and so on, and she likes him. Why? Well, she says, and other people say, he began to tell her stories about his life, what he had experienced as a soldier, as a man, as a child. And they only mention one, or hint at one. But Shakespeare never describes those stories that he told her. But he does say that she responded with trembling and tears. But she was interested, is what I'm trying to say, in the outside world. And he was not one of the local guys, so she wanted out. And he provided this other world. But of course, in the actual play, Othello was never alone on stage, ever. He's always with somebody. So I had this one requirement. I got very interested in Desdemona, and of course in the people around her. But I said, Peter, I cannot write this unless you let me take Iago out. As long as he's in there, you know, talks every minute, takes a whole conversation. Nobody knows what to do with him. They lie to him, or they try to please him, or they deceive, you know, it's just like hopeless. He's in there, you know. Now, that for me is part of what I think we were talking about earlier, which is connected not only to that gesture of removing Iago, but also what has been happening more and more and more in my books. Actually, all of them, but to take away what I call the white gaze. Whose eye, whose language is controlling this? Well, in Othello, it's Iago. And when I began to write, the moment that I began to write, the publishing world vis-a-vis African Americans was leaning heavily toward, I call them get whitey books, but there's a better word for that. Man, Child, and the Promise, you know, very, you know, and I published many of them. But anyway, that's And they were like the traditional African American novel where the oppressor is the white man or the white idea or the captain or the plantain, whatever. That's who they were confronting. Ellison, Baldwin, Richard Wright. I mean, you understood. They were responding to, defending themselves, or aggressively attacking that idea of the white oppressor. And I thought, I can't do that. What is the world like if he's not there? And the freedom, the open world that appears is stunning. And I noticed most African American women writers did the same thing. Toni K. Bambara, not always Alice Walker, but many times. Maya Angelou. Those writers and the poets, because the poets were more productive, I think, at that time than the novelists were. But there was this free space opened up by refusing to respond every minute to the gaze, somebody else's gaze. So that flavored a great deal of what I was writing, still does. But you'll understand about Iago now. Why to get rid of him?
In that vein, you told me that Peter, I didn't hear this happen, but you told me that Peter Sellers, the director, said it was hard to talk about Desdemona for him, and he had to call it an event rather than a play or a spectacle, and that would have to do with the very openness that you were describing, but it's still a really hard thing to pull off. If you don't have an Aristotelian drama, you don't have a beginning, middle, and end, because you set out to write a spectacle in which everything that we witness is actually identical to what we hear. There are no actions per se.
No.
What we hear, no concrete physical actions, what we hear, and also, importantly, what we read.
Yeah.
So we witness the speaker's minds and memories at work, both alone and in dialogue, as they give voice in what is the afterlife. This play takes place in the afterlife.
Everybody's dead, so they can say what was really on their minds. It's timeless. They don't have to, and more importantly, they can learn, which they do, most.
Things happen.
Yeah.
But they're verbal occurrences,
Right.
and it is quite remarkable. And I have to say that it was a couple of sold-out shows, and people were captivated. And people who really, truly, special effects were not needed. It was the barest stage. People were captivated. I'm just going to let you in on this.
Well, he had this Rokia Toure is a young woman from Mali, and she sings and plays an instrument. She's the first African musician who said, most African music doesn't have drums. I said, what? So she plays this other drumless music. It's gorgeous. And she does her own lyrics. She's very famous and so on, particularly in London. So she responded to what I wrote, and she had songs for many of the characters. So what Peter did, which I thought was extraordinary, he has Desdemona, and she takes many of the other parts that are there. And then he has Rokia, who's singing with her group. She has 2 women and 2 men. And then her lyrics and my text are huge on the stage. Not little things in the back of the opera house, when you're translating, Mozart or something. This was, you could actually read what she was saying while she was singing. And particularly for me, Rokia's lyrics were the same way. Now understand this. Rokia It's from Mali. Her native tongue is Bambara. Bambara is not written, it is only spoken. So she takes an unwritten language, translates it into French, and then subsequently German, Italian, and English. I mean, she didn't do all those translations, but somebody would take the French, because it played quite a bit all over Europe. So I only saw the whole thing the first time in France, and then finally in English in New York. But I was thinking of, I mean, it's not just that I couldn't do it, but I think she would have to write, don't you think, an unspoken language? I mean, unwritten language, a language that has no alphabet. So she has to write that down. And then she translated it into another language. And it's exquisite. I mean, it's truly exquisite. And, a little thing, we did a book called Desdemona, in which the text and the lyrics are there in one book. And the plan was to do a film in Mali. But as you have read recently, that's unlikely. So, but that was an extraordinary, drama and exercise for me under the guise of Peter, particularly, who's very stimulating intellectually.
I understand that you were going to counteract the notion of thinness now. The thinness of the play, that was part of it.
Yeah.
And that you paid a lot of attention to Desdemona, which indeed hadn't been paid to.
No. And his Othello was thick. I mean, he did it, with, what's the name? Hoffman?
Stanley? Philip Stanley?
Yes,
Philip
yes.
Seymour Hoffman?
Yes.
Oh, wasn't even aware of this.
I'll go anywhere to see him.
Right, yeah. Big fan.
I told him that.
Yeah.
I said, I've seen a lot of bad stuff that you're in. And he said, so have I. But he was, he was Iaco.
Oh,
Very
he
good.
was?
Yeah, he was
Oh,
Iaco.
he would be great.
He knocked it out of the park. He
Yeah,
really
he'd be
was.
great.
And then we did
You allowed him
Desdemona.
as Iaco.
Yeah.
Okay. But still, it had to be a little bit, even for you, I think it might have been daunting to write a spectacle, or as Peter said, an event, which was a postscript, literally a postscript to a story, one of the most famous canonical tragic dramas in English. And it wasn't only a postscript, in a sense, of course, because, as you mentioned, you were struck by the fact that what she fell in love with were his stories, you see, and stories are critical in your Desdemona, and you, in fact, create them. There's very, very, very lush
I wrote
language.
all the stories that Shakespeare didn't.
It's really lush. I mean, no, the travels, there's a tempest thing going on there. There's a lot of Shakespearean language that surfaces in these individual stories. They were like jewels. They were beautiful.
That was a really, undaunted. You don't go where Shakespeare is in language. Forget about it. You can't imitate that. You can't. So you have to find where is the language that you want to use in this production. And it has to be, I start with her. But soon as I knew how she felt about her name, they call, my name is Desdemona, which means doomed or dead or, all these things. And she said, I am not my name. So then I had the quality of intelligence and I had the language. So I could write her section. And then the other problems were writing the sections for other people.
You had said to me that what troubled you about actual performances of Othello was precisely, of course, the way that they dealt with the supposed, you point out the word used for Othello as Moor, but the supposed racial identity of this very commanding captain, and that they can only seem to do this, or they could only seem to do this, by further racializing it, making race itself a very clear, if not the clear part of that spectacle. That is one, and it was like a no-win situation. One, if Othello was going to be played by a white man, then not only did he have to be in blackface, Laurence Olivier, but as a white man, even more grotesquely trying both psychologically and physically through certain gestures to be black.
You're right.
Right.
He had red lips. Laurence Olivier.
But then if played by, and I don't know who played against Philip Seymour, but if played by a black man, that was going to be just as difficult because he also has to try to be black. That is to say, as black as would be recognizable, I'm supposing, to white people, and perhaps even to other black people whose own self-conceptions might be completely inhabited by what you just called the white gaze.
And you had the really classically trained black actors. They loved that play because that was the one time they could be the head, the star of a Shakespearean play legitimately. And so it circled itself constantly. And nobody was really interested in what was really going on underneath his role as well as hers. It got very pro forma. You could imagine, Eugene O'Neill in that wrestler story. What was it? Don't mind.
Well, yes, it's the one great supposedly great Shakespearean role, but it also centers around something which came to be understood as an interracial marriage.
Right, exactly.
And once you have interracial marriage, at least in stagings of it, then you are clearly exacerbating the racially inflected visual baggage
And the
of
other
Othello
thing
being black on stage.
that you and I were talking about, this woman, young girl named Barbary,
Yes, yes.
who is Desdemona's nurse companion, and who dies early because her lover or something or other didn't like her. So she faded away and sang a song, which Desdemona sings constantly after she finds out that she's in the same position. She's called Barbary, and I didn't think about it, but Peter said, Barbary? What is that? And I said, I don't know, it's the Barbary Coast. He said, it's Africa. It's not a name. It's just what people say when they want to say Africa back in the day. Now it's different. And I said, so I called Rokia, and I said, what's a good Mali name? I mean, like a name of a person. So she gave me 5 or 6. And I think I picked Rowan or something. So in the play, she says, they're all dead, right? So Desdemona says, hi, I'm so happy to see you. You're my best friend. And the Barbary says, you don't even know my name. Then they go into a little thing about, but you were my friend. No, I was your servant. But no. You never did. And then they end up, she's saying, you don't know my life. And Desdemona says, what are you talking about? I married a black man. So I don't want to hear about. And then finally, this little argument goes on in the play, and finally, Desdemona says to Barbary, did I ever hurt you? And Barbary says, no. Now, they can get rid of all this, who's better than, who treated me, who's black, who's white, who's this, on a personal level. Did I ever do anything mean to you? No. Well, now we can talk. I mean, it's that kind of feeling. And so that in the play, such conversations take place which move people from where they were at the end of the Shakespearean play and into other areas. And some of them, almost all of them, well, actually all of them, end up good. I mean, they're good places to be that they have talked out. That's it.
Well, you essentially made that character.
Yes.
And again, what can I say? It was, though the way, when they speak at cross purposes to each other, and one believes that, no, they've always been in perfect harmony, and the other says, what are you talking about? It
Yeah.
takes a little while for the change to take place, but then, in fact, the change comes from the person who believed that there was always perfect harmony.
Right.
She provokes the change, and it's quite, I'm just going to say, to use a bad word, masterful, but I want to speak to you about something you once said to me in conversation about beloved, and we both laughed at the time because I found out the following, that you too, you said to me, had trouble finding, that was your word, a couple of your own sentences in that text, and those in which you said the act of infanticide is committed. The act, as in...
Yeah,
Right.
I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
I was saying, where does it? It's so buried. I mean, you know it. The reader knows it fairly soon, but the actual act is so buried in the text. I couldn't remember exactly where it was. You know,
Always hard to find.
Right. Still is.
And so if you buried it from yourself, I thought, which is in effect what had happened even to you, what the reason for that was interesting. And we talked about it, and you said to me that the act that these kinds of sentences, and it's just a couple, really, barely represent is one that was, quote, already done, that's already happened, unquote. And what was, quote, more interesting to you was how it could have happened, and then what, quote, what happens then.
Yes.
And then you went on to relate your near elision or blank statement of such moments to the problem. This is early on, before the Ingersoll lecture, the problem of representing goodness as opposed to evil. And here I'm going to quote you because you referred to the opening sentence of Paradise. So I'm just going to quote from what you had said to me earlier. And so this is before the Ingersoll lecture. And you have this on your mind. It's not because the Divinity School invited you to talk about goodness. It was already there. This is a previous conversation that we had had. And I found it. I realized there was something back there. Quote, I always thought that evil, war, murder, all these things needed a tuxedo or a top hat or a drum roll because fundamentally they are not complex and not interesting. They are devastating. That is all. What is really interesting to me is their opposite, which has no top hat, has no musical, has nothing, is just goodness. And you don't get anything with or for it. Now, that is not far away from the way in which I write.
I said that?
You said it quite a while ago, and I checked, and there it was. I had this little echo in my mind. I don't want you to think, this is Toni Morrison still talking, I don't want you to think about the thing, the infanticide, or, returning to Paradise, the first sentence, they shot the white girl first. Probably, I don't know if it's the most stunning first sentence, sort of shocking first sentence in a long novel.
And saves time for the rest.
It saves time for the rest, absolutely. You get everybody wants
Everybody
that,
wants
and it's
that.
done. And now they'll never know who that white girl was.
Never.
Guess what? Yes, I can't. I'm not going to be describing her. I wanted to say that earlier, though, and I'm just going to say it now, that I was thinking it must have been quite challenging for you because, think about it, all of you. There is an enormous amount of particular description, particularly of natural things, made things, landscapes, but there were almost never, or there wasn't really one that I could recall, an actual kind of third-person description of a person's physical appearance in all of the fiction. And that remains really, it's kind of a tour de force in Paradise, because you don't know who these people are ethnically, racially, et cetera, from the beginning to the end. And that word white happens in that sentence, and it It happens with a gun, and that's that. And it is really true. I mean, because the specificity of your concrete descriptions is quite stunning. And yet, when one thinks about it, people don't get treated that way.
They don't describe them, what they look like, you know. Paradise, they have this very, very serioso, closed black town, whose blackness is 8 Rock.
Right.
And that's what they do. And then you have this other place where they shot the white girl first, and it's a group of women. And the effort was to not to use any language that would signal, cultural language, any, which would signal which of those women was the white girl. Although many black girls tell me, I know who it is. I know who it is. So when I was selling the movie rights, they said, well, you know, we can't do it. If you sell it as a movie, you have to have a cast. And one of them is white and the other.
Something somewhat similar happens in a different way, very different way, which I think you told me your own editor remarked upon.
Oh, about
in Home, and so Home, your most recent work. It really is, I think, one of the most beautifully written of all your works, and it has a particularly powerful invocation of natural, sensuous beauty, the beauty of the natural world, also the cultivated natural world, all those gardens in which nothing goes to waste. I would like to ask you about the way you brought that sensuousness into view. It's a very particular way in that novel. But first I want to ask you about that period in American history in which you chose to situate, as was mentioned in the introductions, that the story of Home, which of course is a very Homeric story of a returning soldier warrior, it seems fitting to add here in Ithaca. All your historically situated novels take place either in a time unmemorialized in American literature, such as racially, religiously, and nationally, ethnically unsettled 17th century America. I remember when Toni Morrison was first researching that book, right, A Mercy, and very few people are aware of how absolutely rigorously Toni researches these books. I mean, it's just, she'd say, Claudia, know any books, any decent books about 17th century America? I mean, it's the most interesting time. I mean, nothing had gotten coded yet, and everybody has different monies, and there are all these different people running around. I mean,
find the
and
money.
there are no books. You know, there are really no books, but she worked really, that was over a year of people just out scouting for books. But in any event, or you deal with a much publicized age like the jazz age, but from a point of view and about people in that age, never written about before. And as you pointed out to me, and did you notice that I never mentioned jazz? In jazz?
You know, the jazz age
Right.
among us in literature is always Fitzgerald and, you know, white people dancing and getting hip, you know. And, you know, in Paris you have these bands. So it's a little exotic, and they sort of, in literature, they claimed it like it was theirs. It's not yours, Fitzgerald. It's.
Oh, I love F. Scott. I'm sorry.
I love
He
F.
had his
Scott,
troubles.
too.
He's a Princeton man. You
No,
know?
no,
He
no,
had
no,
his
no.
troubles.
Now I'm just taking the little cultural thing off of here.
Right.
So if we talk about it, we never talk about the big-time jazz musicians.
Yeah, that's.
We never talk about the big-time. It's just all over uptown. It's in the city. And
Most beautiful descriptions of
the
city I've
yeah.
actually ever read, but we're going to leave that aside for now, because I want to go back to Home. Why did you choose to write specifically about the 1950s and post-Korean War United States?
Well, it would seem to me to be unwritten about in the sense, I don't mean historically it was written about, but I wanted to pull that scab off. You know, we sort of think of the 50s, you know, what was those, Leave It to Beavers and Doris Day, and it was after the war, everybody was making money, and Levittown, and so on. And when I heard these people before the first election of Barack Obama, they were saying, we want to take our country back. And I was wondering back to where, and it was really the 50s. I mean, I think that's what the back meant. I mean, it also meant some other things, but that time in their minds is like, so that's not what was going on. First of all, there was a war that nobody even called a war. They called it a police action. And you may notice, it is still going on. They have a militarized zone now, with soldiers on one side and the other. And Mr. Un has just said he's blowing everybody up if they do bad things to him yesterday. So there's this war thing. And it was the height of anti-communism. People went to jail, people lost their jobs. And it was also a time when doctors, scientists, were experimenting on helpless people. You know, children and black people, and, you know. We only got a hint of it I only, and I think the rest of the world, in Vietnam, because they experimented with LSD on soldiers. And then it was sort of horrible for a while, I think. But prisoners, soldiers, black people, Mexican people, whoever, that was the group. You remember the experiment at Tuskegee with the syphilis? You know, they let half of the men get cured and the other half, they didn't cure at all. They just want to see how it progressed. So that kind of thing. So that's what C, the girl in there, comes across one such doctor. So those things were things I wanted to create. And also just the whole country is like a battlefield for him. He has been in a battle, a real one, he killed people. Then he comes back, and it's another fight as a black man trying to get from area A to area B. And I never say he's black. My editor said something about that. And I said, how you know he's black? He said, I just know. And I said, how? He said, I don't know, I just know. But he said to me that it was not a good idea to never identify him as black. Now, I've been with this editor forever, and we read a lot. And I think about what he says, and I might do it or I might not. But I know he's thinking commerce, you know. So I should do. So I had a little thing I stuck in when he gets off the boat and he goes to this preacher's house. And the preacher says, you have been in an integrated army, and you may think the North is different from the South. Legal and custom are the same thing. You know, he was trying to. So that's, if the reader is interested, is one moment where it becomes very clear. Not just that he can't go in a restaurant or he can't go to a toilet, or, you know, but all those things are just baked into the travel. And he can't, you know, he just is accommodating to it all along until he gets close to home.
Well, I wanted to say that actually I once, I mean, you were kind enough to give me a manuscript version of the book, and it didn't have that signal.
Mm-mm.
But it had every other signal, of course.
Yeah, it didn't.
And there was the brilliance, really, of how you achieved this, because you only identify his racial identity through indirection.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you present the moves that he makes from inside him, which is extremely difficult. That is to say, all those methods of direction, you indirectly present all those very explicit signs and methods of direction. He doesn't read them out loud, but he'll just move aside at a certain point, choose a different water fountain at a certain point. Those methods of direction that indeed littered the landscape that we called segregation, and which just served as kinds of deictic instruction manual for the American landscape. That is signs that were saying, not here, but there. You know, written large wherever anybody went, and you managed to make them just part of the landscape. And that was extremely eerie. I wasn't for this signaling that your editor introduced, God bless him, but, and commerce, but because you get left with, in fact, an actual immediate experience on the part of someone who has no choice but to accommodate himself to it if he wants to essentially stay alive. He immediately experiences something which isn't beautiful at all, as the landscape is going to become in home, but a purely conventional written landscape, which works like a kind of second nature for everybody who moved within it, including, of course, the people who were allowed to drink here,
Yeah, right.
who would never drink there.
Right.
So inhabiting Frank's point of view, seeing these things from within him without remarking upon them, at least up until that moment, that I think was an authorial feat. It's kind of typical of you that you pull this off and you absolutely do not tip the top hat.
No.
It just happens. It happens through a kind of accretion, and you get used to it as you're reading it. And at the same time as Frank moves throughout this very demarcated, signed landscape, you present him as a person. That is, as just that, as Frank, a troubled man and war veteran on a mission that now involves returning home. And thus, we actually see him, despite the fact that he's being directed all along the way. And it's a very long trip, and there, of course, are the different train cars and the different restaurants and the different places you can stay, and the special book which tells you where you can stay and where you can do this and that. But yet, because this is all being done from inside him in an interesting, really interesting way, you leave out the whole middle thing. You leave out all the explication. We don't really see him as black, between quotation marks, per se, but really we don't see him as other than a man, per se, who doesn't want to go home and has to go home because of this sister he's so close to. At the same time, you do something equally subtle to what would be the natural colors of this landscape. It's the only landscape type book that you've got, the only Homeric kind of travel book that you have. Because usually it's in a place, it's a house, it's the city, it's a specific place. Basically, until Frank arrives home, you delete all the colors of the landscape.
Yeah.
So would you comment on that?
Yeah, I have him with a little eye problem where all the color drains. But he's, sort of off, so who knows? And he drinks. But in the description of things, there's no color at all. Everything's either black or white, or gray, or nothing, or it's not mentioned. Until he gets very close to home. The first spot of colors after he has a little fight, protecting, he thinks, some girls, turns out he's beating up their pimp. Anyway, he sees this girl's blouse, which is torn, and it's bright yellow. And then he goes, when he gets back to his hometown, and he says, were the trees always this green? And then there is something that I found, it took a long time, Claudia, but when you see cotton fields, they're usually white because cotton is white. But before the ball, there's this pink flower. And if you look at it, and it only lasts about 4 or 5 days before it drops, and then the ball comes. But if you look at that field at that time, you see all this pink, miles and miles of pink flowers. So I had Renee, my assistant, find me. I said, find a picture of cotton at that particular time. So we did all the cotton research. You have no idea how much there is, where, when, how to protect it, the bowls, the vinegar, and what happened to the land. But anyway, I got 2 pictures of a cotton field at that moment, before the bowls come, and when they're just these pink blossoms. And he stands there and looks at that. And then everybody has a garden, and it's not just for decoration. Certain plants are there to kill insects or prevent this, color that, so that everything in this, it's like it's a little personal. In the days of my youth, which is a long time ago, we didn't have any garbage cans. Not only because nobody would pick them up, because there wasn't any waste. This is before they start wrapping things up. You know, you get blueberries now in a little cardboard box or a little plastic. The meat is all wrapped up with saran wrap and stuff. Everything was, you know, you had to chop it, buy it, pick it up. And there was no waste. Newspaper had a lot of uses. Jars, you put nails in. Rotten food was compost. Everything was, there was no waste. So I kind of translated that into the 50s, although I don't remember it in the 50s. I remember it from the 30s and 40s before the war. And so I put it in this little town where they did the same thing, you know. The gardens were like, I think there's a line in there where she says, it's not Eden, this is like a little war. You have to cover the tops of the corn so squirrels don't get there. You have to do this for the skunks don't come. You have to, you know, it's a constant battle. And if you know where to spray the garlic, you don't get the, you know, the things that will eat your tomatoes. So there was that feeling of profound, bright color and the useful, because he hated that town. It was boring and nothing was going on. So that when he returned, it is beautiful because of the color, not because of the grand houses and the gardens, but also it's safe. And people may not like you in that little town, but they're not going to hurt you. Nobody's going to hurt you. And that was home. Whatever else one thinks of home, that's not just a house. It's this yearning for this place where you're safe.
I would like, if you don't mind, I'd like it if you read from, I'm talking here about chapter 13, in which, in fact, you let the natural colors back in because he can first see them. And you've taken all the color out, and you haven't identified him, really. And then, from his point of view, it's no longer a segregated sign landscape. But in fact, he's now seeing the place that he couldn't see before because he just wanted to leave it. So if you wouldn't mind, and also at the end you bring the color back in a quilt that C and others had made. And what is done with the quilt is to properly bury a man who had an unsigned grave. And that I just found very significant, and we're talking toward the very, very end of the book. That's when the color comes back big. And you don't, you know you're missing it, but you don't really know it, and it's sort of like him in that sense. You really are. You put us right inside him because he didn't know what he was missing.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, well, here you go, if you don't mind.
Let's assume
Chapter 13.
I know what I wrote, and therefore I don't need my glasses.
I have your glasses.
I know. Never mind. I got it. I got it. It was so bright, brighter than he remembered. The sun, having sucked away the blue from the sky, loitered there in a white heaven, menacing lotus, torturing its landscape, but failing, constantly failing to silence it. Children still laughed, ran, shouted their games. Women sang in their backyards while pinning wet sheets on clotheslines. Occasionally a soprano was joined by a neighboring alto or a tenor just passing by. Take me to the water. Take me to the water. Take me to the water to be baptized. Frank had not been on this dirt road since 1949, nor had he stepped on the wooden planks covering the rain washed out places. There were no sidewalks. There were no sidewalks, but every front yard and backyard sported flowers, protecting vegetables from disease and predators, marigolds, nasturtiums, dahlias, crimson, purple, pink, and china blue. Had these trees always been this deep, deep green? The sun did her best to burn away the blessed peace found under the wide old trees, did her best to ruin the pleasure of being among those who do not want to degrade or destroy you. Try as she might, she could not scorch the yellow butterflies away from the scarlet rose bushes, nor choke the songs of birds. Her punishing heat did not interfere with Mr. Fuller and his nephew sitting in the bed of a truck, the boy on a mouth organ, the man on a six-string banjo. The nephew's bare feet swayed, the uncle's left boot tapped out the beat. Color, silence, and music enveloped him. This feeling of safety and goodwill he knew was exaggerated, but savoring it was real. He convinced himself that somewhere nearby, pork ribs sizzled on a yard grill, and inside the house there was potato salad, coleslaw, and sweet peas too. A pound cake cooled on top of an icebox, and he was certain that on the bank of the stream they called Wretched, a woman in a man's straw hat fished. For shade and comfort, she would be sitting under the sweet bay tree, the one with branches spread like arms. When he reached the cotton fields beyond Lotus, he saw acres of pink blossoms spread under the malevolent sun. They would turn red and drop to the ground in a few days to let the young balls through.
This is up to you.
The end?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Have a little drink, maybe? Have a little drink?
A little drinky poo. Okay.
Because it's very crafted. Seems to just have is very crafted.
Well, I'll read just
the entrance of the color and the entrance, and then the important, really symbolic color at the end is very
Oh, yeah.
beautifully crafted.
Yeah, that's nice. Carefully, Frank placed the bones on C's quilt, doing his level best to arrange them the way they once were in life. The quilt became a shroud of lilac, crimson, yellow, and dark navy blue. Together they folded the fabric and knotted its ends. Frank handed C the shovel and carried the gentleman in his arms. Back down the wagon road they went, then turned away from the edge of Lotus toward the stream. Quickly, they found the sweet bay tree, split down the middle, beheaded, undead, spreading its arms one to the right, one to the left. There at its base, Frank placed the bone-filled quilt that was first a shroud, now a coffin. C handed him the shovel. While he dug, she watched the rippling stream and the foliage on its opposite bank. Frank dug a 4 or 5 foot hole, some 36 inches wide. It took some maneuvering because the sweet bay roots resisted disturbance and fought back. The sun had reddened and was about to set. Mosquitoes trembled above the water. Honeybees had gone home, and fireflies waited for night. A light smell of muscadine grapes, pierced by hummingbirds, soothed the gravedigger. When finally it was done, a welcome breeze rose. Brother and sister slid the crayon-colored coffin into the perpendicular grave. Once it was heaped over with soil, Frank took 2 nails and the sanded piece of wood from his pocket. With a rock, he pounded it into the tree trunk. 1 nail bent uselessly, but the other held well enough to expose the words he had painted on the wooden marker. Here stands a man. Wishful thinking, perhaps, but he could have sworn the sweet babe was pleased to agree. Its olive green leaves went wild in the glow of a fat cherry red sun. Then he speaks again, and he chattings up this book. I stood there a long while staring at that tree. It looked so strong, so beautiful, hurt right down the middle, but alive and well. See touched my shoulder lightly. Frank, yes? Come on, brother. Let's go home. Did you get some questions?
Just a couple more that and I think we have the time, and there are a few that from the audience I would like to pose as well. You just mentioned this. You said he's talking again. So let me go right to that you do something, another really unusual thing in home. You've done these things before, especially the talking book you all probably remember from Jazz, the book that actually addresses the reader at the end of the Jazz. But you actually have, for the first time, I think, in your fiction, you have the character address you.
Yes, right.
You, and the word used is you. You as you, Toni Morrison, or you, rather, his narrator. And he seeks to enlighten you as to acts that you could not have narrated since he himself had not yet acknowledged them or admitted them to himself. So you actually have him come to this and speak to you about it. And for example, chapter 14 begins very sort of directly. I have to say something to you right now, to you right now. I have to tell the whole truth. I lied to you and I lied to me. That's how that chapter begins. So getting the truth from a character of your own making is an unusual, but may I say characteristically Morrisonian innovation in fiction. Do you see any relation between this recent development in your latest novel and something that indeed you've just repeated here that you said years ago about losing the white gaze from your imagination and your writing, freeing yourself from it and seeing the whole world open up?
It did. And, characters, I don't want to be too sappy about this, but they do sort of exist, maybe like ghosts, and like ghosts, they talk all the time, and they're not interested in anything except themselves. And so you have to shut them up. I found that very true when I did Song of Solomon, because that woman pilot, so she was just so she speaks once at the funeral, I think, of her daughter. The rest of the time, people are talking about her or with her and so on, because they're greedy. Now here, I use this character as in order to give up control to someone that I sort of theoretically did not control. To A, tell me things that I couldn't know, tell me, the author. Also, to explain his own self to himself. To correct me, tell me you don't know what you're talking about. I didn't think that. I thought this, etc. So our conversation, the reader's eavesdropping on this conversation, so that in effect, the sort of same thing that happens with those dead people in Desdemona. He can learn something about himself. You know, it's not just, oh, and this happened, and I wanted this, and then this. He arrives at a place through watching his sister grow up and stop being such a, little baby, that he is able to remember and say what he did in the war. Most of it's about, oh God, my friends died, they died, oh, and he's mourning them all the way through. And part of that mourning is to keep him from addressing his own culpability, I was telling somebody the other day, they were talking about shell shock or the new treatment for it. And I said, don't you worry a little bit about the guys who come back who are not shell shocked? You mean you just go over there and come back and everything's fine? I worry as much about the damaged veterans. I worry a lot about them, but I also worry about the ones who are not damaged. They don't talk to anybody anyway. But it was the same sort of thing with this man, Frank, who did a terrible thing on a helpless and certainly innocent child. And until he says that, he can't bury this guy that he first met at the opening of the book with his sister. And it is, in that sense, a little bit, well, a lot about theoretical descriptions or feelings about what being an adult is, what being a man is. The book opens with, they were so beautiful, so brutal, and they stood like men. These are on horses. And they stood like men. Beautiful, brutal, masculine. So then, by the time we get to the end, there's another definition. There's another definition. When he says he stood like a man, that, refers to his first, teenage notion of what glory, adulthood, and manhood is, till he comes back, and there it is. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry about I go on a bit.
No, I know that we've gotten a few questions which ask this question, so I'm going to ask you right now. We both agreed you're not going to be discussing any novel you might currently be working on, but you will admit to the fact that you, in fact, you are writing another novel right now. Right. You want to say any words about it at all? I think you said it's not. Okay. Then I'm going to go to I think we have a few minutes, just a few, and I'd like to go to some questions first from Professor Leslie Adelson, who has a great quote from you in her question. She writes, in your Jefferson lecture of 1996, you, Toni Morrison, wrote, quote, "Time, it seems, has no future," unquote. And Professor Adelson asks, have your thoughts and literary approach to the relationship between past and future changed since then? And if so, how? I'm just going to repeat your quote. Time, it seems, has no future. Do you still feel that way?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking that the past, what we call the past, is always here and always now, and we're always responding to it. And we talk about the future, I don't know what that means, generations and gadgets and so on. And maybe the weather changes or an asteroid falls, an event. But the future of time, I mean, think about the astrology is all about the past, isn't it? How the world got, how the universes got here, and how long it was, and is there nothing? It's all happened already. There is nothing but the past. Sounds a little depressing, but what? But I mean, the acquisition of knowledge, even to put it to some use that might be used tomorrow or in 10 years. And the knowledge comes from the past and the present. So it, in a sense, all of the interests, whether they're these, finding this, what's they doing over there in Switzerland with the Boggs, Higgs, that's all about the past. Even though they only have the instrument to find it now, it's really about finding something that happened, I don't know, billions and billions of years ago. You understand that? It's so clear to me that I don't have exactly the right words to explain it.
There's actually a directly related question to your answer, just happens to be the case. And this is from someone named Allison Schoenberg. Is she here? Is she still here? Allison?
She might have gone home.
Oh, hi, Allison. There she is. There she is. So, and you write clearly, so I can read it. You write, in Beloved, you suggest that the past, and in particular slavery, are inescapable. They will always return, whether in physical form, as in the title character Beloved, or figurative form, as in the influence slavery had upon Cepha's life. Do you still think this is true? Is our historical past something we cannot escape that marks us for life, or is it something we can overcome? Or is that the dichotomy you want to?
And I think it's eternal, it's something that exists, and you don't move on. You keep it in your head. You don't have to behave in a certain way because there was slavery. But there was. And you have to remember something, that it was not, who said the peculiar institution? There was nothing in the world more common than slavery. Nothing. Who were the slaves in Rome? In Greece? What did they call them in Russia? Peons. What did they call them? There were always enslaved people. How slavery in this country got to be called black was the whole point of a mercy about when slaves were separated into white slaves and black slaves. The white slaves were called indentured servants, but their contracts went on forever. Then after this rebellion, the laws in Virginia were, there will be a white person can maim or hurt any black person for any reason. And the black person can have no weapons under any circumstances and no rights of law. That was legal. So now you got poor white people still thinking they're better than poor black people. Why? Because they manipulated this non-existent thing called racial identity. So, all of that was part of this. And to answer the question, it's not about, one day we will forget their slaves. Maybe it will happen, when everybody remarries everybody, I don't know. Then it'll be that way. But I just want to take slavery itself and separate it from American slavery as a particular thing that happened to black people only. That did occur, but it was deliberate, sustained, and it meant that the people on top didn't have to worry about what they called at that time the People's War. There will be no People's War if you put together all these poor people. If you make sure that this group of poor people hates that group of poor people and has control over them, then we don't have to worry in our plantations and in our lives. And that hasn't gone anywhere, as I'm sure you know. You may not be aware of it on this campus, but out in the world, it still operates.
Chris Holmes. Chris, great question. Well, I'm afraid he's probably, well, Chris Holmes, who writes, Beloved is famously understood both to be a story, quote, not to pass on, and not to pass on. Do you feel that the novel as a genre is capable of both recovery of traumatic stories and exorcising the ghosts of those stories?
Very much exercising ghosts. And I was, a little bit of play, not to pass on, meaning not to ignore, and not to retell. So that was the dilemma of Beloved, of the creature Beloved. The dilemma, my dilemma, in trying to figure out whether Setha did something good or bad, infanticide. There was a lot of it, by the way, when women were forced to have the children of their masters. So in the article, in the newspaper article that I read, that was published in Ohio in the 19th century, 67, whatever it was, the grandmother said, I don't know whether to condemn her or praise her. So I was thinking sort of the same thing. If I absolutely knew that my children at a certain age, or my babies, were going to be, and you name something horrible, so I couldn't figure it out either. So I decided that the only person who was legitimate to answer that question would be the dead child. She would know whether it was a good idea or not. Thanks a lot, Ma. So when she appeared sort of in my imagination as a functioning thing in other people, she was real to Seth. She was, as her returned child, she may have been an ex-slave taken when she was a child, so there were a number of things she could have been. And she succeeded in that, in the imaginations of people. But the very end, about the footprints coming and going, is a question of, at that time certainly, and probably still, no one has settled on that question that she's asking. They come and they go. The footsteps are big or they're small. And we don't hear her name. We just hear the weather and the ice cracking and the trees. And maybe that's her, the disremembered. Maybe that's always there. Anyway, that was my solution.
There's a very short one, which you may not, in fact, you may say, well, I have no answer to that question. And it's from Tommy, who wrote, if you could get the answer to any question, what question would you ask? It's kind of clever, Tommy, but
Very clever, Tommy.
But I think it's also sort of begs the question in a way.
I don't really have any questions. I mean, I have interests, and I have imaginative journeys, but there's no final. If somebody said, does God exist? And I could get an answer, yes or no. I did that when I was 11. And the girl that I was talking to said, he does exist. No, she said he doesn't exist. I said, yes, he does. She said, no, he doesn't. And I said, how do you know? And she said, because I have been praying for blue eyes for 2 years. And he didn't deliver. So what do I get to get? 100 years later, I write a book. Called the bluest side.
Good answer. Good answer. Thank you.